Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to be here. I'm going to correct the book that is finished is the Invisible Children book, and that's actually on the website. It can be listened to or read for free on the website. The book that we're working on, that I get up so early in the morning to work on, is The American Children in 100 Charts. So when I start this talk, I always say that I don't want to be misinterpreted. And because I talk somewhat of educators, law enforcement, social workers, foster families, health workers, we're all doing what we can with the resources and training that we have. And it's frustrating work, it's hard work. And it's often really disappointing work. I don't have many happy stories. A lot of what I say is hard to believe. And for those of you who want proof, I can't answer it here tonight, send me an email. I want you to know I've been at this for over 20 years. We're working with colleges all over the world, actually, that help us with research and writing on this topic. So I'm Mike at invisiblechildren.org. If you have a question and I try and answer within a day or two. If I don't, send me another one, and unless I'm traveling, I'll get back to you pretty quick. So I start by my experience as a CASA guardian ad litem, and actually I should clarify, and actually it's a big deal that I do clarify, that the elimination of the CASA guardian ad litem program in Minnesota has been stopped. You're right, it got to 30, but what happened was former Supreme Court Chief Justice Kathleen Blatz read an article in the Star Tribune a few days before the vote was being taken to end it. And she showed up at the board meeting, and she raised hell, actually. She got them to not vote to end the program. She's now on that board, and I have great hope that it will continue in Minnesota. There are 950 CASAs in the United States. There are 100,000 CASAs like me. I've quit taking cases, but I go back to 96 when I began, and I worked for 12 years as a volunteer. And over those 12 years, I worked with 50 children, all of which were removed from the homes they were in. It's hard to believe, but in the news, in the piece that I sent out to you, and again, I can send it again, but the report that was done in Minnesota recently, that is the only report of its kind in the nation, was actually funded by former Supreme Court Chief Justice Kathleen Blatz. It shows how 88 of the 200 children that were killed by their parents while in Child Protective Services in Minnesota over an 8-year period, how they were killed, what could have been done to stop it, what failed. And to point out, the important thing is that there aren't 2 of these reports in the country. This is the only one. There are other similar, I shouldn't say similar, because there's really nothing similar to the in-depth report that's been done. And if you haven't looked at it, you will see parts of it, as Renee pointed out, the Star Tribune reports. If you don't get the Star Tribune, you know, I'm gonna say they have done some great reporting. I have interviews on camera with Brandon Stahl, who did the investigative reporting in 2014 on the tortured death of Eric Dean, a 4-year-old who had his face chewed off over 2 years and broken bones. And really, that's getting into the middle of the talk. I'll start the talk by saying my first visit to a 4-year-old was at a suicide ward in a Minneapolis hospital. Her 7-year-old sister was with me for 11 years. There were 7 children in that family. They could not be put together in a foster home because they were sexualized, which, that's really problematic if you're a foster parent and your children are seeing this. There's a lot of trouble with all the parts of Child Protective Services, and it's not that the people doing the work aren't doing what they can. They are. They're doing what they can. But we have a system that really has been cobbled together over many years that people don't really understand. Now, the good news is the medical community has discovered some very important things, and they have programs that work. And for those of you who don't know what ACEs are, Adverse Childhood Experiences, it's actually a measurable way of determining how damaged a child is. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you have, 6, 7, or 8 ACEs, you have mental health issues. What trauma does to a person, while different than what it does to a veteran, because a veteran's trauma is having someone's head blown off next to them, or the vehicle's gone over an explosive device and there's just been a huge explosion. And so that changes the brain in its own way. ACEs in children is better described by the World Health Organization's definition of torture, which is extended exposure to violence and deprivation. All of the children I worked with in Child Protective Services had extended exposure to violence and deprivation. And what that trauma does, again, it changes the brain. It's biological. You must remember, children don't get into Child Protective Services because one thing happened one day. The oldest child has usually been raped or beaten or starved for 4 years. That's in my reading of the literature and my experience in the system. And what happens then to the child is that the thinking part of the brain just gives up. The hippocampus can't keep the child safe from being raped or starved or beaten. And what happens then is that the amygdala, and I'm not a brain scientist, but the literature says, and I sent the books out actually, that the 2 books that I recommend, The Body Keeps the Score and The Deepest Well, if you want to know more about human psychology than, the past ages. They've relied on, I'm getting deep here, but the DSM is a historical manual that is just almost not applicable to the many, many children I'm talking about. So it changes the brain. It changes how they behave. It changes how they react. It's why they can't sit in school and learn and get a good grade, because they're worried about the other shoe dropping, where the damage is going to come from next time. They live with high anxiety. They're frightened people. And what happens to them is that their behaviors, just like the veterans, who are violent often, there's 2 suicides a day still with veterans. But with children, and so I was going to say with the veterans, the courts have learned how to deal with them a little more kindly. They're trying to accommodate broken people at that end of the spectrum, veterans that have fought for our country and had things happen to them that changed their lives forever. With children, we're not there yet. We expel children from daycare, elementary school, junior high school, high school. If that happens, and it does, and actually we've dumbed down our education system to accommodate. So a lot of the graduates that we call graduates really got GEDs, and they really can't add, and they really can't read. The most recent Hennepin County testing of 3rd grade reading, history, and math scores show some very frightening, and it's been going on since COVID. I will speak to COVID in a minute, but 10% of the Black 3rd graders could do math at grade level in the last test. about 20% could read. That should scare us all. And it's not their fault. You can't blame the children. I'm going to keep referring to what I call the punishment model, because in America, we are founded on that. We're founded on a punishment model. We burned witches. I mean, I try to be light once in a while, and don't get me wrong, it's a hard topic. My wife doesn't take me to parties anymore because people ask me about this and I talk about it. So secondary trauma is real. It sticks to you if you work with the kids that are tortured and they talk about it. So I think I've done a half a job of explaining what ACEs are. I have a 3-minute video that's included in that sheet that I sent back. That's very powerful, very simple to understand, how the medical community, by accident, was testing overweight diabetics to see why they couldn't keep the weight off. Well, it turned out it wasn't diabetes, it was child abuse. And that's where that study came from. And from there, the healing and the skills building movement from the medical community, it's an anti-punishment approach to dealing with abused and neglected children. And if you think about it, in my experience, you can't punish my kids. They have been tortured by their parents. And the study I just mentioned to you of 200 children murdered by their parents while in Child Protective Services in Minnesota, a progressive state. And believe me, when I start talking about Alabama, Texas, and Louisiana, we don't hold a candle to them. It's really awful in some states. It's not good here. But in that study, there's no near-death reports. You know, I mentioned visiting a 4-year-old at a suicide ward. For every child that succeeds at suicide, pre-10 or 11, they estimate between 200 and 300 children cry. Now, Kendria Johnson lives just a few miles from me in Minneapolis, and she killed herself, 6 years old. Foster child, hung herself. And, you know, there's no transparency in the system. If it doesn't make the newspaper, it didn't happen. And that's where I'm going to go with the talk, is how we can call our state reps and remind them that there's no information coming out of Child Protective Services. And because there is no information coming out, no metrics of how the kids are doing, why they came into the system, what the depth and scope of the problem is, the public doesn't know anything about it. And the poor people that are social workers, educators, law enforcement, health workers, that have to work with my kids that are broken, that hate authority, hate themselves, often hate themselves, they treat everybody badly. Why should anybody, you know, I mean, it hurts me to have known so many unhappy children. You know, at about 10, 11, they kind of wake up to how different they are from the rest of the kids in the classroom, and they don't take it well. Some of them do all right, especially if they have an adult in their life that's come to love them and create some kind of a bond. But kids that have been removed from their mother have a bond that is broken, that is never built again. And just to come back to some level of trust and getting over the things that did happen to them. I had a boy who was tied to a bed, sexually abused and beaten over 4 years, left alone for days at a time in a room in Richfield, in a 1-bedroom apartment with no food, no place to poop, no water. So I have those stories. And those children, were treated badly in school. They felt terrible in school. Most of them don't graduate. I think 2% of foster kids get into colleges at the rates that we've had recently, in my life, so it is all tragedy and all sadness from my perspective. But that ought not to be reason we don't talk about it, don't call our state reps. Nothing's going to change until that happens. The American Children in 100 Charts book is a complex work. And as I'm trying to tie together all the parts to this puzzle, and there are many parts. I'll mention Prozac, Ritalin, Zoloft, psychotropic medications. About a third of the kids in foster care are on those drugs. And very few people know what it's called suicidal ideation is printed on every packet of all those drugs. And I should tell you that Johnson & Johnson, I think it was sued for $2 billion for illegally selling those drugs to pediatricians for use on very young children in 2014. Now it's become very common to prescribe them. It's just, and until you know what that word, suicidal ideation, those words mean, unless you had it, and I have, because I was prescribed an off-label psychotropic medication for migraines, it's not just thinking about killing yourself. It's fully formed thoughts of you killing yourself. I had that daydream with a banker in downtown Minneapolis. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Now I had 5-year-old kids, 7-year-old kids, 9-year-old kids put on those drugs. Because the reason they put them on the drugs is because they're violent. One of my boys he was 12 years old, beat up his teacher so bad he broke her bones. He quit, sued the state. But if I'd have been him, she was in the wrong place. You got to stand between the kid and the door. They got to have an escape route. And it's seamless. You don't know what you said. But it's a trigger, and it happened, and someone gets hurt. And that's really what, with the carjackings and the crimes and all this stuff going on, those are my kids. It was Chief Justice Blacks that made the statement that 90% of the kids in juvenile justice come from Child Protective Services. And if you know anything about criminal justice, all the people they get are from juvenile justice. And at this time in America, and for the last 10 years in America, our recidivism rate at 9 years has been 80 to 90%. So not only is it a pipeline to prison, now the Supreme Court has overturned the last Supreme Court's, the last Supreme Court said you can't execute juveniles and you can't lock juveniles up forever without parole. Kids that committed crimes, they're all my kids. They're all come from terrible homes. They're all terrible things happen to them, and they're broken human beings. And we could fix them. That's what I love about ACEs. There's all kinds of things going on to help kids if we can get at them and get them the results they need. The skill building, the healing. But the Supreme Court's now made it possible for 12-year-olds to spend their whole life incarcerated. And I mean, it's such a travesty. It really is a sadness. Now, what you should know about me and CARA, Kids at Risk Action, is that when I was becoming a guardian ad litem in 1996, David Strand was coming out of the program. Now, David Strand had made public policy in Europe for 10 years on children's issues. He was so appalled when he came back to America, when he made some of the comparisons, that he became a guardian ad litem. He passed away 2 years ago, but he became a friend of mine and a board member at Kids at Risk Action. He joined a college, I forget which one, but he did a PhD thesis called Nation Out of Step, which was a statistical analysis of the difference between how Northern European countries took care of other people's children, at-risk children, and how we did, back to the punishment model. And I have that, but I have 30 or 40 years now of data on how different we are from the rest of the industrialized world. How we have just built prison after prison after prison, militarized the police force to take care of my kids who are violent and in many times dangerous. I don't know if you followed the carjackings that were done over the COVID period, which locked my kids in toxic homes without mandated reporters, without escape, and more alcoholism, more drug abuse of young at-risk families. And so there were 12 and 14-year-old kids out carjacking, a lot of them, and they shot people. They did terrible things to people. They still do, but less now. Somehow, I don't know, the numbers are down. But we are on track as a nation to go build more prisons, more jails. And believe me, it's not easy being a cop. Again, I am not blaming them. My kids are the training that we give people now has simply got to change. We simply have to change the way we police children for sure. I'm not going to speak to how complex the system is when you get into adulthood and letting people out of prison that are violent and dangerous. And that's the argument I always run into. But we got to at least try and interrupt child abuse. And that's why the CASA organization being thrown out of Minnesota was such a criminal act. I am really angry about program management trying to do that. They're still in place. They're still trying to get it done. But at least we have somebody of power in the seat that can bring sanity into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the rest of us can start to make the changes that are necessary that will, in fact, interrupt the generational abuse that's been happening. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to give you the numbers. 3.5 million to 7 million calls a year in this country on a national level, representing 3.9 children per family. 1.9 is the national average of children per family in this country. But if you get into Child Protective Services, the last study done in Hennepin County was 3.9 kids per family in Child Protective Services. And I have a lot of stories about that if you want to ask me questions about that, because anyway. So for us here today, I'm glad you were talking about calling Amy Klobuchar, who, by the way, I had a big fight with. He was a county attorney on a case that I worked on back in 96 or 7, and we were at loggerheads what to do about it in Child Protective Services, politics. So it really boils down to state representatives knowing more about this than they do. And I thank God for the reporting the Star Tribune has done. Back to my interview, if you ever want to see it, I'll send it to you. You have to email me. But Brandon Stahl's reporting on Eric Dean, and some of you might remember that boy dying after he was 4 years old. His face, top of his head were chewed off. It was an insane deal. There were 15 reports by mandated reporters that he was getting his face chewed off and broken arms and bones. All of them were ignored. At that time, 4 counties in Minnesota, not that long ago, screened out 90% of the calls. And at the same time, it was against the law for social workers to consider prior histories of child abuse in a family when they interviewed a new case when it came in, which is crazy because that's generational child abuse. That's what we're talking about. So for those of us that have learned something about this, our website has 11,000 pages. We're followed by Reuters News. We have been followed by Bloomberg, Reuters, Chicago Tribune, other major newspapers, because we report on all that are going on. So there's a lot of information now. I'm sorry it's kind of hard to read, but if you get just the, actually, can I share a screen and show you, or did I give you the Invisible Children? I want you all to have the weekly updates so that you can Friday morning get the weekly updates, and that'll keep you in touch with the thing that I'm talking about. And you can send those updates to your state rep, and that will have impact. So here it is. If you can see it now, under this Educate and Inform button, at the very bottom, it says sign up for the newsletter. Friday morning at 9 a.m., you will get the last week's news. And at this time, well, I won't say any more than that. If you get that, you'll keep in touch with us. If you really want to get into it, if you go up here to featured articles, you'll see what's on top of our list, a little more in depth. So there's quite a bit about the CASA organization. But it's also what is child protection. The new book can be looked at here. That's the chart book. It's not finished, but it will give you an idea of what it is. And actually, I'm going to open it and show you kind of the whole story here on this book, what we're trying to accomplish. It's 4 pages in, and it defines chapter groups 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I've tried to put all that into the talk today, so I know it's too much. I know you can't remember the many things I've talked about, but I think it's about where I should stop and ask you for your input and your questions, and be glad to try and help you sort through what I've brought to the table this evening.
Thanks, Mike, for sharing so much. I think people are overwhelmed.
Yeah, that does happen.
If you want to, folks, you can put a question in the chat also.
Mike, thank you. That was outstanding. It's a very, very tough and very difficult topic. My question is tell me, what would your perfect world look like? If you were going to solve this problem, if somebody gave you the authority to solve this problem all by yourself, what would your perfect world look like?
There's 2 or 3 parts to that. That's the right question. The first part is so simple. It has to do with the punishment model. And it's hard for me to describe the depth and scope of the problem the punishment model puts into place. But to tell you that our prisons are full of my kids, and have been for 40 years that I've been here, if we just quit that, if we quit expelling kids from daycare and giving them what they need, because they need to be dealt with, they need skills, they need healing. If we just quit expelling kids from elementary school, and I have a story about how bad this is for the employees. I was brought into an elementary school in a wealthy Minneapolis suburb, maybe 8 years ago, where the principal was being thrown out by teachers that didn't like the way he handled problem kids. He was one of the first people to bring ACEs healing into an elementary school. And so they had me come in and talk about this. And I got pretty good reviews. I explained to them why the kids in their classrooms were throwing things out the window and troublesome. You know, those are the kids that are broken at home. And if you punish them, they won't ever come back. They won't finish school. They will pass through the juvenile justice system. You know, as Kathleen Blacks has said, the difference between that poor child and a felon is about 8 years. And on the opposite side of that, the difference between boys and girls, my board member Damon Cosina says that the difference between that poor child and a preteen mom with no parenting skills, a violent boyfriend, and a drug habit is about 8 years. So that principal eventually got thrown out of his school. I got 52 good reviews and 4 bad ones from the teachers. My presentation. They were politically powerful, and the superintendent let him go. Now, I have a business background. I told him to sue the state, and he did, and he won. But he could never be a principal again, and it was his love. It was his love of life. And it hurts me to think that the children in that school suffered, the county and the state suffered, and he suffered. And it's such a bizarre world we live in. The punishment model is so embedded in who we are. And until the legislators begin to understand, and part of this book, by the way, is economics. The cost of this is just unbelievable. You know, you see it here and there. One of the things I'm going to show you right now is a page that I would like you all to know exists. Some of you may go look at it. At the very end of the featured, I'm clicking away to get to the featured part of this. There's a crime, this one here is called American Crime Costs and Statistics. And we're not going to read it together, but I'm going to hit a couple of highlights. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of its prisoners, 2.3 million prisoners, 4.5 million Americans on parole, and about 8 million Americans with prior histories. About 27 million Americans involved in the criminal justice system. There are Oklahoma and Mississippi have 20 times the incarceration rates than most other industrialized countries. 100 million Americans have a criminal record. These are all linked to the studies that were done, and you can argue with the information, but it's pretty close. And I don't think it's gotten any better. So the sheer cost of what it is we're doing to my kids, these kids that get into child protective services that need help, it's its own argument. If I could find, that's what I'm trying to do with the college at Ripon. I'm trying to find colleges that have access to the studies that are being done. See, the thing about college studies is they are insular and they don't let their information out very well. And unless I can get that information, stick it into a book and social media, people won't know about it. So that's part one. If I can get people to get this information, and again, every week, Friday, 9 a.m., we send out something that is directly related to what I'm talking about tonight. And if that could get in the hands of your state rep, and I should tell you that one of the things that I did publish got into the state house, and now we have 50 state reps following us on the Friday morning MailChimp, it's called, our emails. And so it's all involved. If we do something, it's, you all know it. It doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. But it was because of something, the thing I just said about the thing that was spread around at the State House, that the Star Tribune reporter wrote an article. That article was seen by Justice Blatz, who's retired, and she stepped into that boardroom meeting, and she got the 3-3 vote that stopped the ending of the CASA program. So it's, you never know. You just got to keep trying. That's really all there is to this game, no matter what side of it you're on. And this page, though, will blow your socks off. If you go down a little lower, you'll see the University of St. Louis study, Washington University, and Iowa University did 2 studies on the cost of crime. One's $1 trillion a year, and that does not include if the thing happened to someone you love, your neighbor, your friend. So that's just the cost of crime, and those are my kids. They're bringing it to you. That's why we should, I tell people, you know, until it happens to you, it doesn't matter much, but if you know somebody that's had a burglary, a violent attack, there's a lot of it happening more now than ever. COVID is going to wash through our nation, because that pretty much doubled up the length of time those kids didn't get help. And they are more broken than they used to be, and there's way more of them than used to be. So
Wendy
that's
would like
number
to-
one. No, oh, go ahead.
Wendy would like to ask a question.
Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know if it's so much of a question, just a couple comments. As a mother of a child who's now an adult, he's grown up, but in his schooling years, my son has Asperger's and he was always on an IEP in school. And one of the things we made really clear in his IEP was that he was never going to have homework to bring home because it created such a battle in our home. The other thing is we were never going to allow him to be suspended from school because for him, that was a reward. He loved being suspended from school because, you know, it was easy then. But I just have a comment on years ago, I was hired, I did an AmeriCorps Vista, and soon after that, I took a job as a family support specialist for STARS for Children's Mental Health. And they sent us through a lot of trainings, and I will never forget. There was a doctor out of Texas who came and spoke to us on childhood trauma. And he talked about, we had gathered a lot of the parents in the 4-county area, Stearns, Benton, Sherburne, and Wright County, parents who were fostering kids and who were really frustrated because they take in a foster child and they do not know that foster child's story oftentimes. They don't know the trauma that that child's been through. And this particular doctor was telling us how antiquated the foster care system was, the
Yeah.
rules. You know, they will make sure that the dog in the home is rabies free. You know, they'll go through all these things that you never
Right.
hear about a child that's gotten bit by a dog and gotten rabies in a foster care home. And you know, his thought was, why are they not putting money towards lasers in the home for sexual you know, molestations between children, things like that. You know, he brought out of how antiquated our licensing systems and you know, the rules for these foster care parents were. The other thing I remember is I had a school principal beg me to get the county to remove the child from the home. And it is so hard to have that done. You know, the state looks at it as long as there's a roof over the head, over a child's head, they have food and clothing. That's all they need to be concerned about. I had a mother who was a heroin addict and couldn't remember 5 minutes down the road if I had been in her apartment and then returned. It was just horrific, the things that her daughter had to go through. And the school was so well aware of it. I mean, everybody was aware of it and wanted to help this little girl, but everybody's hands were tied. I think it's really, really difficult to have children removed from their homes. And you know, I think oftentimes I have relatives who, many of them were on the autism spectrum, but ended up homeless. And even in a situation like that, the county doesn't like to step in and take children away from their parents for the sheer fact of being homeless. I mean, those children are well cared for in every aspect. They just simply didn't have a roof over their heads. So lots of strange scenarios out there, and it's important work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, I was kind of curious, well, and Oli has a question, but I was kind of curious if you feel like part of the punishment model is because there is a desire to bring back slavery in this country, and that's a way to do that.
I can't answer that, but I can tell you that if you were a Black person, you'd think that. You know, that's actually, I have a statistic that's unbelievable, and I followed this story. It goes back to when Sheriff Stanek was Sheriff Stanek in Minnesota. And they had a thing called Code Red, and they arrested 44% of the black men in Minneapolis, Minnesota over a 1-year period.
Wow.
Adult men. And then 58% of those men were rearrested for a second crime within 4 years. So yeah, no, it's come to light now with the Trump nightmare that we're having, that it's over a third of the sheriffs in the nation belong to white nationalist organizations. And policing has always been militarized. I mean, that's who we are as a people. And in our cities, trying to fix this, it's a painful thing. I don't have answers, but yeah, no. Again, we just have to do what we can to keep sending stuff to state reps, even those people that are state reps that you might not think are listening. They are, not all of them, but some of them. And the financial end of it's going to get them in the end. We're finding some strange friends now with the CASA program because it's volunteers. It should save you money. We have this huge population of people that want to help, and the county is saying, no, we just get out of here. We don't want anything to do with it.
Ole, do you want to ask your question?
Well, yeah, Mike, and that actually kind of leads to my question. You mentioned that Guardian Ad Litem program before, and hopefully now it's coming back. Two parts to my question. First of all, how does that Guardian Ad Litem program help the ones you refer to as your kids? And the second part of the question is what does it take for a person to be a Guardian Ad Litem?
Yeah, on the first part of it, the definition is that you speak for the child in court. And the judge actually, this is really the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, is I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. And I fell into this by accident. And I realized how deep this hole was when I got into it. And it was such a challenge. And believe me, it was painful. It was really, really painful for me. But once I got through that, and I took it more as this is a job to do. I'm not going to be emotional about it, because watching it's really hard. You really have to step right into it. And then you realize the judge wants you to tell him or her the truth. I had a judge buy me lunch and give me a list of kids in her courtroom on Prozac. Think about that. I had a judge ask me if she could put that 11-year-old on Depo-Provera because she was having sex. She was prostituting herself and had been for some years. You realize how important this work is to save these kids. And like I say, I don't have happy stories, but I did have an impact on these kids. I did in my time. And then it brought into the work I do now. And I should tell you that I'm not the only one. Denise Graves, who actually had money, built $11 million worth of foster care homes for kids aging out of foster care when she quit being a Guardian Ad Litem volunteer. So what does it take to be a Guardian Ad Litem? I don't know if I answered the first part right, but basically you visit the child, there's a bunch of training, you get to know the child and you get to know the family, and then you draw within the lines of the law. If this child is being, they're going to set up some kind of program for the parents, and you got to make sure that everybody does what they say they're going to do. And in the end, it's a call. No, I think the child should come out. No, I think they're safe. And back to that report, there's just way too many kids dying. The parental rights groups, this is a sidebar, but it's an important sidebar. The parental rights groups and the lawyers and law schools want this business, and the churches want Child Protective Service out of this business. And the United States of America is the only nation in the world on the planet that has not ratified the International Rights of the Child Treaty of the United Nations of the 1980s, which means, and I could give you all kinds of statistics, I'm going to give you two, which means an 11-year-old girl can get married in 17 states in this country, but she cannot get divorced until she's 18. It also means that parents can withhold safe medical care from dying children, and they do die. It means a lot of other crappy things that I started to talk about with the international standing in court thing. I've got it's on a website about 7 blogs ago. I wrote, a student at one of the colleges wrote, what happens to you in Norway, Sweden, France, Finland, Belgium, Germany, blah, 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 if you do these things to your children in their country. They put you in jail. I could go on. I know I'm nuts when I get to this end of the evening and I'm kind of tired and and I get going. You can put your hand up to slow me down.
And you're gonna answer the question about how do you become one? Or,
Well, you apply, if you'll send me an email, I'll introduce you to Gerard. Gerard runs CASA Minnesota. I'm on the board over there. And we're looking for recruits because we're going to start that program up again. And I'll introduce you to him. He'll send you the application. It's actually on the website, CASA Minnesota MN. But a warm introduction to be better. He'd like to talk to you. But you can do it either way. I can put that in the chat here. I'll put your cat. Where does that go? CASAMN.org. CASA.
and how is CASA different than CARA?
Yeah, no, there are 2 different things. Kids at Risk Action is strictly an advocacy group. We have several programs, financial literacy. We've got a huge program for CASAs that gives $120,000 ad grant to CASA so that they can get the word out, which is a big part of the problem. Big part of the problem. 950 CASAs and they don't talk to each other and they have no real presence in the social media world. We're trying to change that. So I am a guardian ad litem and I'm not active now. And I promote the program. I'm on the board over there to try and help them keep alive because they came so close to. I'm a founding member of CASA Minnesota. And but when I ask for donations, I ask for donations for Kids at Risk Action because we need funding to keep the things going we have. We're all volunteer organization, really. We have no paid staff. I hire consultants for certain things. And right now I've hired a consultant that's a Google genius to help me do this Google ad grant thing. And we're doing a big promotion in Janesville, Wisconsin in May, if everything falls into place. And then I'm starting conversations with other CASAs about how to use that $120,000 ad grant and how to get the word out.
Other questions for Mike?
Well, thank you for having me. You're a tough bunch. Up until 7, 8 in the evening, you know, that's beyond my bedtime normally, but I wanted to be here.
We're glad you came. I think Darlene
Thank
wants
you.
to say something.
No, I just want to thank him. I was a teacher and had some students that I know we were concerned about, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that we have these people like you that are doing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mike, I have a question. Do you get any support from any of the faith communities?
You know, it hurts me to say that I've tried really hard. The United Theological Seminary came so close to working with me. And really, I tried to explain several times to the Catholic Church that this would take some of the pressure off of the negativity that they were facing through their priest struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually came close to working with Father Harry Berry on the nonviolent movement. I love him. He's a wonderful man. But I am singularly focused on children. I don't deviate at all. It's all about the kids in child protection, or that should be in child protection, because they really are at the wrong, they need the help. They must have the help.
Anne has a
Mary
question for
Griffin.
you.
I have a question. I was wondering how well teachers are trained, and cops, for that matter, to deal with these kids. I was a teacher at one time. It wasn't really for me, and I got out of it, but I've had difficult kids in my classroom, and how do teachers really know how to deal with them when they're,
Yeah, the good news is that there are methods, and I started to talk about it when I talked about the elementary school principal that got thrown out of his school. He had arranged to have those children brought to him. Now, since then, the real answer is for him to build a team, because there are people that are better at working with the bizarre behaviors that we're talking about. Because this stuff isn't normal. And people that don't have that, it's okay. But there's got to be a path for that kid to not be just thrown out of the school. And so more and more communities, there's more and more training taking place for teachers. The bad news is that rural America, especially rural policing, and sheriff's departments, I think probably are the absolute worst. It's just the lack of training. They don't open their emails. You know, they're old school. And what we're dealing with here is a shift in understanding of a core human issue. Mental health has never been well addressed, maybe anywhere, you know, sufficiently. And this is a turn so deep that unless you get the training, it's hard to be a foster parent, because the patience it takes to work with these kids is just off the page. It's really hard. And you got to have a backup. There's got to be things you can do when things get severe. So you've asked a good question. What is the training? And the good news is it exists largely in urban areas. It's starting to take place more, you know, outstate, rural areas. But counties don't have any money. You know, rural counties don't have any money. The big cities have the money, and so they can afford some of the stuff. So go to the trainings, or, you know, recommend those things. Mostly take information and send it to your state rep. They're supposed to listen to you. And if you get worked up, go ahead and call them. I've had good luck. I'll tell you one story and then I'll shut up. So years ago, how did it happen? I called it was a county commissioner. She had been the mayor of where I live, Minnetonka. And I saw her name as the head county commissioner. So I called her and said, hey, I want to talk to you. Can we meet? And so we met at the Ridgedale Library in a quiet room. I had 2 board members with me. And I told her my problem. And I said, we need $5 million for children's mental health and child protective services, or somebody's going to die. Yeah, I know how I said it, but you know what I'm getting at. And she said, Mike, she said, I'm sorry. There's so many lobbyists pounding on the state reps and stuff that there's just no money for that. There's no constituency for that. I can't help you. And I said, well, and I kind of yelled at her. I said, you know, we had $1 billion for the stadium, $1 billion for streets and highways, and we had $1 billion for something I can't remember now, but there was 3 of them. And Sam, my board member, kicked me under the table to calm me down, and we left on unhappy terms. 5 years later, this is a very true story, and I'm so happy that you're letting me tell it. One of my other competing nonprofits, actually the one that did this study that I told you about tonight, called me and said, Mike, can you come and meet with her name is Jan Callison, county commissioner, and ask her for more money for mental health? And I said, oh yeah, I go with you. And that morning's paper, Serendipity, had an article by Sheriff Stanek, Washington County Sheriff, and Ramsey County Sheriff, threatening to sue the state and the county for not providing timely mental health services to the people in their squad cars and jails. And when I got a chance to speak, we were at her offices that day. When I got a chance to speak, I put it on the table and I said, I don't know if you remember me, Jen, but I was asking you for money here a few years ago and you said we didn't have any. I said, these people are threatening to sue you for not providing timely mental health service to the people in their squad cars and jails. Why can't we sue you? And as a practical matter, you don't want to be on the wrong side of this. Now, the happy ending to that story, and it's really happy to me, and I'm just proud as a peacock to be able to tell you, I sat behind her at the task force on child protective services when Eric Dean died, and Governor Dayton called child protection in Minnesota catastrophic failure. And I sat behind her, and she had become an advocate for what I was doing. And when one of the social workers stood up and said, "We don't pick kids up on weekends or after 5 o'clock," she shot out of her chair and said, "You'll find the money to do that. These kids need your help." So thank you for letting me tell that story. Yeah.
And go ahead. And
Oh, so sorry to show up at the last minute. I had, of course, conflicts. I really just kind of used the link to say I had made a big ask of the Wright County Indivisible group to see if they would talk to your CD6 representative and maybe our senators about the abuses of Medicare Advantage and the dangers in a fiscal commission. This is a totally different subject. So, Lori, I think we
talked about it earlier.
we've
we've already
communicated.
covered that, Ann.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
didn't know if you needed more explanation. That's kind of why I showed up.
Well,
Just
what
to-
we can do is that at the end, we can anybody who needs, if anybody needs a more explanation, once we're done with this presentation, we can
Mhm.
talk to you.
All right.
Wendy, did you have something quick? 'Cause I
Yeah,
think
Mike,
pretty much
if
wrapped up.
you have information on how to get into a guardianship program, I'd be interested in that. In the chat, I just posted guardianship.org. I checked into this about a month ago, and it happened, I just had it on the desktop of my computer. It's about a 34-page document outlining the responsibility of guardianship. And from what I understand, this is from a national group, there is no true licensing to be a guardian.
I gotta point out to you, there's a real difference between being a guardian ad litem and child
Yes.
protection and the other, which is more intensive.
Financial and yeah,
Correct.
yes. But yeah, so I am interested in information you have. And then if anybody's interested in this other stuff, I just posted it. But what I kind of figured out or seemed to come to an understanding was that this is kind of up to each county to find guardians. And some counties are more successful than others. Is that true?
It's a great sadness and part of the reason things are as they are. Because we've got 1,000 counties in the United States, and each one of them has their own set of rules. And when
Mhm.
you get into what it's like to be the judge in a county, I remember 25 years ago when really this was a fight. People didn't like being that judge. It wasn't law as they were taught. So Kathleen Blatz called together a national conference and brought all these judges into the room and told them what was happening. I tried to get to that, but I couldn't get in because I wasn't a judge. And it did change things, but still, what you pointed out is that it's just the right hand and the left hand and a federal, and it's trying to make sense out of something. And we're 50 years behind Europe in how we take care of other people's children. And until, back to the good question of what would you do to change things, ending the punishment models, first priority, interrupting, pulling the kids out of the river we're getting good at, we got to quit throwing them in. So interrupting child abuse is one of those things that we all have to want to have happen. And putting resources into quality daycare, making life easier for people that earn bad money. There's so many poor people now. And the stress and alcohol and drugs and the politics, there's so many things working on these young families. Those of us here lived through different times. After World War II, things were easier for families. And this last 10, 20 years have really shown us that the world is going this way, and COVID just made it much worse. And so we really do have to speak out for people that don't have. It's a great sadness to me. Counties, rural America is really, really suffering.
Well, Mike, sad note to end on, but I think it's a really poignant, important note too on this topic. So I want to thank you so much for coming and for the work. I actually want to thank you for the work you're doing, because my father was a child protection agent. So this work is near and dear to my heart. And I'm with you that we're going the wrong direction. So if you have how to get rid of that punishment system, maybe you can send that info to
Well,
us.
I'm going to tell you that if you keep sending stuff to your state rep that I send to you, they'll learn about it. And some of what I write is directly about the punishment model does not work. It hasn't worked in 30, 40 years. And the sooner we get rid of it, the better.
Great. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, friends. Good night
Thank you.
now. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.